We begin this episode with a look back at the history of the Tasmanian salmon industry and how it intertwines with my own. In 1967, my parents bought this house behind us. My dad had left his job as a teacher and had picked up a job with his true calling as a marine biologist. As a fisheries scientist at an operation a mere 10 minutes walk from here. And this became my playground and my learning ground. We'd race our billy carts down the hill behind, all the way down to the cul-de-sac and the little track that led ultimately to the far south. We'd roll our billy carts down this dirt track until we've got to the Derwent River and the beautiful majestic waterway that you'll see in just a moment. And here it is, the Derwent estuary. And some days I'd follow this track even further and go around and visit my dad after school at his workplace. When we got to here, we knew we were halfway, a place that we affectionately called the Stink Works. And although it's been vastly improved now, still doesn't half pong. We'd finally made it. This was the Sea Fisheries Laboratories, and my dad was the first dedicated marine scientist employed by the state of Tasmania. Initially his research was on scallops, but later there were rock lobster and a range of other species. The entrance is around the front now, so there's no access from this gate, but up here was where all the science for marine science and aquaculture in Tasmania started. Dad left the Fisheries Laboratories in the late 70s when he was promoted to a position in Hobart to take on the role of fisheries management for the entire state. His position as chief scientist was replaced by the amazing Dr. Trevor Dix. The building behind us is now a luxury hotel, but in the early 1980s it was the headquarters of the Tasmanian Fisheries Development Authority, and in the office on the top floor sat my father, planning the implementation of a brand new aquaculture industry for Tasmania, farmed Atlantic salmon. In late 1976 we moved from over there to over here on the other side of the Derwent River. I was still at school at the time, and by the early 80s, however, I was working in my first job, but still scumming off my parents and living at home. And then, out of the blue, suddenly we get these visitors for dinner. And sitting around the dinner table, these guys with sort of strange European accents. I finally found out that they were Norwegians. And they were over here having discussions with my dad, who by this stage was in a senior management position with the Fisheries Department, Tasmanian Fisheries Development Authority. And these guys were talking about something really new called salmon farming. But that didn't really interest me. I was much more interested in some of the other things they were talking about. For example, one of them was Herman Witzinger, who was on the Kontiki raft. And it was far more exciting to hear about him catching sharks by the tail and flinging them onto the raft than about salmon swimming around and being fed. So from here grew the Tasmanian salmon industry. Dr. Dix and his amazing team hatched out the first Atlantic salmon from eggs in Tasmania for over 150 years. The eggs came from the Gaydon hatchery in New South Wales, up in the highlands near Jindabyne, and originally descended from 35 Atlantic salmon broodstock that were brought over from Nova Scotia in the 1960s. So from this building behind us, the practical operation of the Tasmanian aquaculture industry originated. This is the new entrance to the Sea Fisheries Laboratory at Taroona, although now it's known as the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies, a collaboration between the University of Tasmania and the State Government of Tasmania. And in these buildings here gather the highest concentration of aquaculture and marine scientists in Australia possibly in the Southern Hemisphere. But did Richard Flanagan consult any one piece of work from the thousands of research articles done by these research scientists in his book Toxic? Of course not, because he does not want to know the truth. Richard Flanagan sees some sort of conspiracy in that the headquarters of the Tassal Group are conveniently located in the same building as the marine farming branch of the Department of Primary Industry, Water and Environment. But for someone who's got a Master of History from Oxford, perhaps he could have done a little bit of research. The brown building behind us is the Marine Board building of Hobart. It was opened in 1972, and one of the first tenants was the Department of Agriculture, which later merged into the Department of Primary Industry, and today the Department of Primary Industry, Water and Environment. One of the first tenants in the Department of Agriculture was in fact my grandfather, Len Miller, who was the head of that department. In the late 1980s, the Tasmanian Fisheries Development Authority was converted into the Department of Sea Fisheries and moved from its offices on Old Wharf into the Marine Board building behind us. My father's office was in this building. Today, the Marine Farm branch is still in this building, and so, as the new tenant, is the Tassal Group. No conspiracy, just a matter of history. So, remember that my father was the senior Tasmanian government employee who was charged with establishing the salmon industry back in the 1980s? Well, considering that, this passage from chapter 7 is very interesting indeed. According to a former senior Tasmanian public servant who was asked to remain anonymous, in an account confirmed by a second source, the Norwegian consultants who helped establish the industry in the mid-1980s advised the Tasmanian government that other than in one or two experimental pens, salmon farming could never be allowed in the D'Entrecasteaux Channel. Now, I have no idea who this former senior Tasmanian public servant is, but I know who he's not. And unfortunately, my father is not in good enough health to be interviewed on camera. But according to him, Richard's claim is simply not true. There never was such advice given by the Norwegian consultants. In fact, those consultants formed a joint venture company with a Tasmanian operator and established the salmon farming company known as Nortas. And where did Nortas farm? Well, according to this history of the Tasmanian aquaculture industry, published by the University of Tasmania, Nortas farmed their fish at Bruny Island in the D'Entrecasteaux Channel. So it's hardly likely that this mysterious person is accurate by saying the Norwegians said to never farm in the D'Entrecasteaux Channel. And how do we know that this history is accurate? Well, that's because it was written by the person who led the Tasmanian Fisheries Development Authority to establish the salmon farming industry in the first place, that being Tony Harrison.